to Arachnid Alley. I'm Connor, and today we are going to talk about enclosures, some differences, the pros and cons, and how you should choose which enclosure you need to get to help your tarantula have the best life. So, first off, we talked about this in my last video, and if you don't understand the terms that I'm using, I highly recommend that you go and you watch that video to be able to understand the things that we're talking about. First things first, look up your species and find out, is it arboreal, is it terrestrial, and that will greatly impact your enclosure choice. After you know whether it's arboreal or terrestrial, you're going to know the arboreal ones, because they like to be up in the trees, they're going to need something taller like this. And the terrestrial ones, because they like to dig, they're going to need something that you're able to have a little bit more substrate, and it doesn't need to be as tall, because if it is tall, your spider can climb up to the top and it may fall and could get injured. So keeping them short is definitely important. If you want to keep a terrestrial tarantula in an enclosure that is a little bit taller, for example, a lot of people use 10-gallon enclosures. That's totally fine, but you're going to want to fill that up with a lot of substrate to make sure that if your spider climbs all the way up and does take a fall, they're not going to fall, 8-10 inches. They're just going to make that, couple inch fall, and they'll be just fine. So if you do want to use a tall enclosure for a terrestrial species, that's totally fine. Just make sure you fill it up with substrate so much to where they're not going to be able to climb really high and fall down really far and get hurt. With that being said, I want to talk about just some different kinds of enclosures that are commonly used. Now, of course, as you can see, I really like these Enclosure enclosures, and I'll explain a little bit more why in a second, but this is definitely a great option for your tarantula. It's a glass. They're really well made. They are nice because they have a front opening door, so you can open up your enclosure. You have full access to come in here, do whatever you need to be able to care for your spider. Close it up. When you pull the latch and you lock it, they won't open, and so your spider won't be able to escape. The top is also able to open. You just flip these little knobs here, and the entire lid will come right off and right back in. And again, once it's locked, they can't get out. So this is a very secure enclosure. They come in different sizes. As you can see, I've got this smaller but tall one, this shorter one, and then I've got larger ones in the background. They come in all shapes and sizes, which is great for different species of tarantula. So I really like these. Let's check out a couple of other enclosure options. Okay, so I'm going to compare these guys side by side. We just talked about the Enclosure. Now, moving over here, this is a herp cult enclosure. They're very nice. They're acrylic all the way around. You can see through them really nicely. And there's lots of really good ventilation. As you can see, there's some along the sides, the front, and the top on the lid as well has ventilation all around it. There are different kinds of lids that you can get. So if you have a species that's a little more arid, you can get a lid that has holes all the way through this middle section as well. If they like a little more humidity, you might consider getting something like this so that it holds the humidity a little bit better with a little less ventilation. Now, these ones are also really nice because of the way they open. They have magnets in the back. They can't lift because there's little rails on the side, and they just slide open just like that, or they slide back closed. They slide back closed just like that. So then your spider has no chance of escaping. They're very secure, very nice. They look good, and they're very clear to be able to see your spider. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about some budget enclosures as well. It is very common throughout the hobby for people to have a lot of spiders, and they don't want to spend a lot of money on enclosures, and so they just find things that work. And you may notice here, these are just kind of your household sterlite bins that you can find from the store. You drill some holes in the top, whatever catering to your spider if it needs a lot or a little ventilation. You can also drill holes through the side, but as you can see, they are clear, so you can see in and find your spider as well. They are not as clear as, say, the herp cults or the glass on the enclosures for the Enclosures. However, you can still see your spider, you can admire and be able to care for it and make sure that it has food and water and the things that it needs. Now this is another example. This is something that maybe you could use for your arboreal tarantulas, as it has a little bit more height, or just your slings, or something that maybe likes to burrow a lot. You can fill it up with substrate. These containers, as you know, they come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, and you can pick them up for relatively cheap, especially compared to a lot of these enclosures that can run a pretty penny for sure. Another common thing that people use for their slings are little plastic vials like this. They also come in different shapes and sizes and everything like that. You can drill holes through them, as they're just a plastic cup, so you can really cater it to the different needs of your different species that you have. Now, with that being said, let's talk a little bit about the pros and cons of going from budget enclosures to something that is a little bit more nice, a little bit more expensive, and kind of weigh those benefits out a little bit. Now, of course, as we talked about, with something like this, it's a lot cheaper. It's a lot easier to come across them. You can go to almost any store, pick them up for a few bucks, and they look okay. I mean, it's nothing fancy or nothing crazy, but they don't look awful either, right? Whereas with something like this, of course, they run you a little bit more money, but they look amazing. It allows clear access, like crystal clear access, to see your spiders and be able to admire them as much as you'd like. Now, I will say something that I don't like at all from getting containers from the store is that you have to go, and you may see I've drilled holes through the sides here. It can take a lot of time and a lot of effort in that way to be able to get the desired amount of holes. Now, if you're only drilling a few holes in your enclosures and you are happy with just, very few, then it's not going to be as big of a deal. However, I will say that if you get something like this, you buy it, it has the holes pre-drilled, they're uniform, they look good, and you didn't have to spend the time doing it. Now, something else that you definitely want to keep in mind is the size of your spider at the moment, as well as how big it's going to be getting. And I would also add how fast the species grows. So, if I have a species of tarantula that is pretty small, but it grows faster, you might be able to have it in an enclosure that is slightly bigger than you otherwise would, because you know it's going to grow into it rather quickly. Whereas if you have a species such as Grammostola, Brachypelma, these slower growing species, you definitely want to keep them in small enclosures. And I'll explain why. Now, if you have a tiny little itty bitty sling and you throw it into a 10-gallon tank, you are going to lose the spider. There's no way you can keep track of a tiny little spider in the grand open space. And you're going to go looking for it, and you're going to wonder where it ran off to, where it might be hiding. You're going to start rummaging through the dirt to try to find your spider. You're not going to be able to find it. It's going to cause a whole mess, and you may end up killing your spider in the meantime, or you might get lucky and you might find it, but it's not worth the risk of losing the spider within the enclosure. The other problem is, if you don't know where the spider is, you cannot get food to the spider either. You won't know if he's eating, you won't know what's happening at all with the spider, if it's dead or if it's alive. Not to mention, who wants to go spend $50 on a tarantula just to bring it home, put it in an enclosure, and never see it, right? Because it's way too small, you don't know where it's at. So it's very important to keep your spiders in something that is adequate for its size, which is where these little dram vials come in handy, because they're very small, they come in different shapes and sizes and things, and you can keep your spiders. If you look, it's a little bit dirty, but you see that little dark speck in there? That is the spider hanging out on its web. This is a Carabiner versicolor sling. and it will remain in here for quite some time. It will reach about an inch or inch and a half in this enclosure before I move it up into something larger, just so that I can keep a close eye on it, make sure that it's doing okay, and that there aren't any issues with it molting or any of the normal care of the spider. Now, like I mentioned, if you have a species that is going to grow a little bit faster than, say, the Carabinum versicolor, if you have a Psalmopoeus irminia, the Venezuelan sun tiger, you may consider putting it into something slightly larger at an earlier age, because they do grow rather quickly and they will outgrow their enclosures really often if you put them in something small. So with a species like that, you may consider keeping them in something like this earlier on, just so that you don't have to continue to rehouse them, as that can be stressful as a keeper, as well as it stresses out your spider to continually move it from enclosure to enclosure. Now, if I can get away with it, I like to keep my spiders in 3 to 4 enclosures throughout their lives, meaning they're going to start out in something like this, they're going to grow to be inch and a half inside of something like this, and at that point I will move them into something about this size and keep them in here until 2, 3, potentially even 4 inches depending upon the species, before I would move them into an adult enclosure. Now, with that being said, that goes for many species, but for my slower growing species, they may have 4, maybe even 5 enclosures throughout their lives, as I like to keep them in containers that are pretty small to be able to monitor them, but give them ample space to be able to walk around, dig, and do all their spidery things. So that's important when choosing your enclosure. Make sure it's appropriate for the size of spider that you have, but that you're also preparing for the future with how big the spider is going to get. Now, with that topic in mind, there are many species of tarantula that will get much bigger and would outgrow something like this, and so in that case they may have 5, 6 enclosures throughout their life, because this, where normally would be an adult-sized enclosure, for them it may end up being something much larger, like these guys down here, at which point adds just another step in their life to having something larger, something that will fit their needs better. Now, something important that I want to make note of is something that a lot of people talk about a lot, and that is that there are different kinds of ventilation within different enclosures, whether you drill the holes yourself, whether they come from the store like that, and what is best for your spider, as well as different species that have different ventilation needs and requirements. And so let's dive into that. Now, a lot of tarantula owners, we like to keep our spiders on shelving such as these, and they work great. They provide enough space, and I'm able to put lights on them and make it look all nice. But the funny thing that we don't think about oftentimes is where our ventilation is placed. Now, if you look on this herp enclosure right here, now if you look at the front of this herp enclosure, you'll notice there's no ventilation across the front here at all. Whereas on the sides, there's vents. On the back, there's nothing. On the other side, there's vents. And on the top, there's vents, right? So you've got 3 sides that have ventilation in them. Now, we always talk about needing cross ventilation, needing the vents to be able to take the moisture out and everything like that. Now, if you take something like this and you stick it on a shelf where there's walls or another enclosure or something stacked right here next to it, clogging all of these holes, now you only have vents in your top, right? And so that cross ventilation that you think you're getting because your enclosure has holes on the sides is actually not doing anything for you, and the only holes and ventilation that you're getting is coming from out of the top. Now, this is important because I have fallen into this myself, where you'll take a cup just like this one and you'll see there's holes poked through every side, all up and down the entire cup. And this is great and it will help your species, your different species, to have that airflow that they need until you cram them all into a small enclosure or a small shelf or something where all that air is just blocked off. They're not getting anything at all. And so this is actually why I have gone towards the Exoterra enclosures. As you can see, the vent is across the front of the enclosure and then up to the lid, allowing air to flow in and up and out, and that will wick out the moisture. Now, there is an option for these enclosures and turn them to the side like this, where your ventilation will come through the front, up the top, and potentially a little bit out the back, right? And that would be phenomenal. That's great. You're going to allow the airflow to get in and to wick the moisture or do whatever it is that you need for that ventilation to help your spider to bring in fresh air and to give the spider that you have the best life possible. So when you're looking for an enclosure, keep that in mind. How are you going to be keeping your tarantulas? Are they going to be on a closed shelf like this? Are they going to be on an open shelf like this, but have maybe something nearby, but potentially enough space between to allow some airflow through? Are you going to be stacking enclosures really tight next to each other? Just keep those things in mind. If your species are a little more humid and they don't need as much ventilation as well, you can totally pack them closer together, kind of like what I've done up top. These species don't need so much ventilation, and so I've put them close together. There's still a little bit of space so the air can, flow in and out, but there's not a ton of space, so then the air isn't flowing completely through, and it's allowing the humidity to stay within this enclosure a little bit more, making it so that there's less care, so I don't have to spray them down as often. As a recap, just remember, make sure you know whether your tarantula is arboreal or terrestrial. Look into your budget and see if you're wanting to get something a little fancier, a little bit nicer, a little bit cheaper, and something that will require a little bit more labor. And then check your space out. Make sure you know if you need front ventilation or side-to-side ventilation, where the airflow is going to be, and how you want that to affect your spider, whether you want to kind of close it off or open it up and allow that to flow through. I will say, in all reality, either of these two containers can do exactly what you need it to do. You just need to cater it to your spider. You need to position it in your room where it's going to get the airflow that it needs, or the lack thereof. And either one of these can have holes drilled through them. It all just comes down to your own personal preference. What do you like the look of? How would you want it to function? And what is your budget? That's kind of the things that it just really boils down to. Your spider doesn't care if it's, has acrylic that's really nice, or if it has just this cheaper plastic. It will not affect the overall care of your spider. The thing to consider, though, is the ventilation and just how your enclosures are going to be set up in your room. Along with that, make sure that you go on YouTube and you find a care guide for your specific species that you are keeping, so that you can know how to best take care of your spider to give it a happy, healthy life. If it needs a lot of substrate, just a little bit, more humid, more dry, go figure those things out. Utilize that knowledge to find the enclosure that you need that will best help and fit the needs of your spider. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you next time. That is a huge perk in my eyes. Dang it.